Finish ugly faster. The Secret of Imperfect Action, written by Ronnie Rowland. Published by Growth Literacy Lounge. You don't drown by falling in the water. You drown by staying there. And yet, most people never even step into the current. They stand at the edge of their ideas, gripping the illusion that certainty will someday arrive. There will be a moment when the plan is polished, the fear is gone, and the timing is finally right. But that moment is a myth. It's a polished mirage that disappears the closer you approach it. What kills dreams isn't lack of talent. It's inertia. This book is a rebellion against the cult of perfection, a call to those who've been taught that their work must be immaculate before it's shared, that their steps must be choreographed before they're taken, that their voice must be flawless before it's heard. It's for the creators who keep editing, the builders who keep delaying, the visionaries who keep waiting. There's a better way. It's bolder, messier, and infinitely more alive. Start where you are. Use what you have, do what you can. Arthur Ashe said that, not as a slogan, but as survival, as a philosophy for movement. Because motion changes everything. It breaks the spell of overthinking. It quiets the inner critic. It attracts feedback, clarity, and direction. But it only begins when you're willing to start before you're sure. Finish ugly faster isn't a manual on shortcuts. It's not about rushing or settling. It's about dismantling the idea that your first step must be your finest. It's about releasing the need to impress and replacing it with the need to express. It's about trading hesitation for iteration, perfection for presence, performance for progress. Every chapter in this book is a nudge, a strike of the match. A reminder that the masterpiece isn't what you begin with, it's what you build after you've started. You'll read stories, metaphors, research, and challenges that dare you to act before you're confident and to evolve in public. Because done is not the enemy of great. It's the doorway to it. And the sooner you stop waiting to look ready, the sooner you become unstoppable. Chapter 1. The Myth of Readiness. A bird perched on a branch doesn't test the wind before taking flight. It leaps not because the conditions are perfect, but because flight is what it was made for. Yet somewhere along the way, you were taught the opposite. Wait, study, plan, polish. Don't launch until the wind is right, the sky is clear, the feathers are symmetrical. The myth of readiness was sewn into your mindset as a virtue. But in truth, it's a velvet cage. Readiness whispers, you're not quite there. It masquerades as wisdom, but it feeds your fear. It convinces you that preparation must precede motion, that you must feel confident before you act. But confidence doesn't come before action. It's born from it. And that subtle reversal is where most dreams go to die. There is no perfect moment. No magical alignment of energy, clarity, and competence that signals go. The people you admire, the ones who launch startups, publish books, perform on stages, and push boundaries, they didn't wait until they felt ready. They moved while they were unsure. They acted while they were unfinished. And in doing so, they became what they needed to be. Research from Harvard Business School confirms this. Individuals who take immediate, imperfect action, even when underprepared, gain an adaptive edge. They're more likely to iterate, learn faster, and ultimately outperform those who delay until they feel ready. Action sharpens the blade. Motion builds the muscle. This myth is not only untrue, it's expensive. Every day you delay under the banner of readiness is a day of lost data, lost feedback, and lost momentum. Real clarity doesn't come from contemplation, it comes from collisions with failure, with feedback, with the messy living world, and none of that happens while waiting on the sidelines. You already know this, instinctively. Think of a time you were thrown into something before you felt prepared. A job, a conversation, a challenge. You adjusted, you adapted, you grew, not because you were ready, but because you were in motion. There's a power that wakes up in you when you have no choice but to move forward. That power is dormant while you plan imperfect. The myth of readiness offers comfort. But comfort is not your friend, it's a soft ceiling. It lulls you into rehearsing life instead of living it. Progress requires discomfort. It demands vulnerability. It asks you to risk being seen unfinished, unpolished, uncertain. That's not weakness, that's the raw soil where growth happens. You don't become ready. You become real, you become responsive. You become someone who launches, learns, adjusts, and repeats. That's the rhythm of mastery. That's the engine of progress. That's what separates the initiators from the eternally preparing. So don't wait for permission from your nerves, your calendar, or your inner critic. The moment you're willing to look foolish, you're ready. The moment you're willing to be seen unfinished, you're ready. The moment you prioritize movement over impressiveness, you're more than ready, you're powerful. The bird never questioned its wings, it leapt, and discovered lift in the act. Readiness is not a prerequisite for progress, action creates readiness. Confidence and clarity emerge after you move, not before. The cost of waiting is higher than the cost of failing forward. Where in your life are you waiting to feel ready before you act, and what might change if you moved anyway? Choose one task you've delayed for the sake of readiness. Do it today, in its current form, ugly, unfinished, and real. Chapter 2: Perfection, the Slow Poison. A glass of crystal clear water, laced with a single drop of poison, still looks pristine, but the clarity is deceptive. The danger is hidden in the perfection. Perfection works the same way. It looks noble, ambitious, even admirable, but beneath its sheen lies a silent toxin: paralysis. You tell yourself you're refining, improving, striving for excellence, but often, you're just delaying. Behind every excessive edit, every postponed launch, every second guess, perfectionism is doing its quiet work, stalling your life. What makes perfection so dangerous is that it wears the mask of quality. It tells you you're being responsible, that you care deeply about the outcome. But caring and clinging are different things. One builds, the other suffocates. The longer you cling to a flawless vision, the less oxygen your idea gets. At some point, the pursuit of polish begins to kill the very momentum needed to make anything matter. Stanford psychologist Carol Dweck found that perfectionism often stems from a fixed mindset, the belief that your value is tied to getting things exactly right. This fear of being judged for anything less than flawless becomes a powerful blocker. You'd rather not act than risk being seen in progress. That kind of fear doesn't make you careful, it makes you invisible. The truth is, perfection is a moving target. The more you chase it, the further it drifts. What you consider perfect today will embarrass you tomorrow, and that's a good thing. It means you've grown. The only people who are satisfied with perfection are the ones who've stopped evolving. They've chosen admiration over impact, and admiration doesn't build anything. Look at the early drafts of world-changing books, the first prototypes of revolutionary products, the scratchy recordings of iconic musicians. They're filled with flaws, gaps, unformed brilliance, but they existed. They were real. And because they were real, they could be reshaped. Perfectionism, on the other hand, keeps your work trapped in the vault of intention, never letting the world interact with it. Here's the brutal irony: perfection never guarantees success. It doesn't protect you from criticism. You can spend years perfecting something only to watch it fall flat. Because in the end, it's not perfection that resonates, it's connection. People don't care if it's flawless, they care if it's honest, useful, human. That's why perfection is the slow poison. It doesn't kill your dreams in one blow. It seeps in quietly, convincing you to wait, to fix. To not show up until you're certain, until you've rewritten the email 12 times, rehearse the pitch for the 50th time, reread the proposal until the ink fades. By then, the window has closed. The moment has passed, and all you're left with is a perfect idea no one ever saw. Your goal is not to impress. Your goal is to impact. That means releasing the need to have every comma, every color, every contour just right. Done imperfectly is infinitely more valuable than perfect in hiding. Because what's unfinished can evolve. What's invisible cannot. Let go of perfection not because it's bad, but because it's unnecessary. What matters is that you ship, that you speak, that you show up, that you allow your work to breathe, stumble, and grow. Progress doesn't wear a tuxedo. It wears sweatpants, shows up early, and gets to work. The poison only works if you keep drinking it. Spit it out. Choose motion over mastery. Choose real over revered. Choose action over admiration, and you'll find that the world doesn't reward polish, it rewards presence. Perfectionism masks fear and leads to paralysis. Progress doesn't require flawlessness, it requires courage. Your value is not in polish, but in presence and participation. Where have you confused polishing with progress, and what might open up if you let go sooner? Take a project you've been perfecting and release it in its current form. Watch what happens when it finally breathes. Chapter 3. Start ugly. Start now. A sculptor stands before a block of uncut marble. There's no visible beauty, no hint of form, just stone, cold, heavy, unfinished. Yet the master begins, not because the vision is perfect, but because the first strike is everything. You don't sculpt brilliance with thought alone, you carve it out through friction, through mistakes, through motion. But most people never pick up the chisel. They stare at the marble of their ideas, waiting for clarity, elegance, or certainty to magically arrive. It never does. Because beauty doesn't appear before the work, it emerges from it. The world's most disruptive companies, best-selling authors, and renowned creators all share one secret: they started ugly. Airbnb launched with grainy photos and broken links. Twitter was a side project with limited features. The first iPhone lacked basic functionalities we now consider essential. None of these began with polish. They began with audacity, the courage to begin badly and let iteration shape brilliance. The psychology behind this lies in cognitive momentum. Research from behavioral science shows that taking even a small step toward a goal creates a cascade of motivation. It's called the Zeigarnik effect. Our brains are wired to want to complete what's already started. But if we never start, we never activate that power. We remain trapped in contemplation, seduced by strategy, and divorced from progress. There's an illusion that the first version of anything should reflect your best. That's false. The first version isn't a product, it's a prototype. Its job isn't to impress. Its job is to exist, because what exists can be improved, what's invisible can't be anything. The problem is, starting ugly triggers shame. You worry what others will think. What they'll say about your rough draft, your wobbly launch, your amateur attempt. But shame only holds power when hidden. Once exposed, it loses its grip. When you start ugly, you take away shame's strongest weapon: silence. You don't need to defend your imperfections, you need to display them. That doesn't mean being careless. It means being courageous. There's a vast difference between sloppiness and speed, between recklessness and resolve. Starting ugly isn't about rushing, it's about resisting the lie that beauty is a prerequisite for value. The irony is, the uglier the start, the more honest the evolution. When you let go of the need to impress, you make space to improve. You become open to feedback, to growth, to change. You engage the world not with a polished mask, but with a living process. And in that process, you learn what actually matters. Most of what you think needs to be perfect won't even register to the people you serve. They're not looking for your flawlessness. They're looking for your usefulness. They want to know if what you offer helps them move, and that answer only comes through release, not readiness. So hit publish, send the proposal, make the call, create the course, speak the words, start the thing. Let it wobble. Let it breathe. Let it fall short. Because falling short is still a step forward. It's still proof that you're alive, in motion, becoming. The sculptor doesn't wait for a perfect block of marble. She starts with what she has, and strike by strike, what was once ugly becomes undeniable. Not because it was flawless from the beginning, but because it was brave enough to begin at all. Starting ugly is the birthplace of progress, not the absence of excellence. Momentum comes from motion, not mastery. The first version isn't for admiration, it's for acceleration. What idea, plan, or dream have you delayed because you feared an ugly beginning? Launch one ugly version of something this week, just to test, not to impress. Chapter 4. The Momentum Principle. A freight train takes miles to reach full speed. At rest, even a small rock can block it. But once it's moving, that same train can crash through concrete walls. The only difference between stuck and unstoppable is momentum. Momentum is misunderstood. People think motivation comes first, that you need inspiration to act. But the truth is, motion creates motivation, not the other way around. Action precedes energy. When you move, even in small ways, you generate the fuel you thought you had to wait for. The human brain is wired for inertia. Objects at rest tend to stay at rest, so do people. But once you cross the threshold of initiation, everything changes. Forward movement triggers dopamine, the neurochemical of reward, and reward reinforces the behavior. One step creates a spark. The spark builds a rhythm builds drive. That's how momentum works. It's not magic, it's mechanics. Still, many stay stuck in the waiting room of ambition, hoping clarity or confidence will knock. But clarity doesn't knock, it echoes from action. Confidence doesn't arrive, it's constructed, brick by brick, through doing. The very things you think you need before you start are often built by starting. Consider the swimmer standing at the edge of a cold pool. The longer they hesitate, the colder the water feels. But the moment they dive in, the discomfort fades. The action itself regulates the fear. It bypasses hesitation and flips the internal switch from contemplation to momentum. The fear was real, but so was the power hiding just beyond it. Small movements matter more than grand intentions. You don't need to run a marathon to build a habit, just tie your shoes and step outside. You don't need to write a novel today. Just open the document and type one imperfect sentence. Tiny actions ignite disproportionate energy. They send a signal to your nervous system, we're doing this, and that signal is far more effective than inspiration alone. The problem is, we confuse momentum with intensity. We think we need to go big to get going. But momentum isn't about massive effort, it's about consistent motion. You don't push the train at full speed, you nudge it, over and over, and each nudge gets easier, more fluid, more powerful. Progress isn't made in leaps, it's made in compounding steps. This principle holds true in every domain: fitness, creativity, entrepreneurship, relationships. Waiting kills connection. Motion builds momentum, and with momentum, resistance weakens, fear shrinks. Confidence expands. You begin to trust the process, not because it's flawless, but because it's working. Momentum also creates a feedback loop. You move, you learn, you adjust, you improve. That loop can't be accessed from the sidelines. You must be in motion to discover what works and what doesn't. Even mistakes contribute to the loop, they're not detours, they're data. The hardest part of anything is not the middle, it's the beginning. Once you're moving, everything changes, doors open. Insight appears. Allies show up, but they only respond to movement, not potential. The world doesn't reward intentions, it responds to momentum. So push the train, nudge it, tap it into motion. Don't wait for readiness, don't chase the perfect moment, start now. Start small, start messy. Because once you're in motion, you're not just moving, you're becoming the person who doesn't freeze, or who doesn't overthink, who doesn't stall. You're becoming the one who starts. Momentum comes from motion, not motivation. Small, imperfect actions ignite powerful energy and clarity. Movement triggers progress, learning, and lasting confidence. Where in your life have you been waiting for motivation, and what small action could unlock movement instead? Take a 5-minute action toward a goal you've delayed. Don't plan it, do it. Let that be the spark. Chapter 5: Feedback over Fantasy. A painter once spent months perfecting a piece in solitude. When he unveiled it, the silence in the gallery was louder than applause. What he thought would inspire awe barely stirred interest, not because he lacked talent, but because he'd painted inside a vacuum. Creation without feedback is creation inside a fantasy. You imagine how others will respond. You predict, you polish, you guess. But reality rarely aligns with imagination. It's only when your work collides with the world that the real shaping begins, and that collision is called feedback. We're taught to trust our vision, to protect it from external voices. But vision, untested, becomes delusion. It can't evolve without contrast, without tension, without the unpredictable reactions of real people. Fantasy feels safe. Feedback feels risky, but feedback is the raw material of relevance. It tells you what works, what doesn't, what matters, what's missing, and most importantly, what's next. The earlier you get feedback, the faster you can improve. That's not weakness, it's intelligence. Waiting until something is perfect before exposing it invites disaster. You're not protecting your idea, you're starving it. You're denying it the nutrients of response, friction, and demand. Because until your idea lives in the wild, it isn't alive. Think of Airbnb's first website: awkward layout, grainy photos, questionable functionality. But they launched, and what they got in return was gold. Not money yet, but insight. Users told them what they loved, what they hated, what was confusing, what they wanted more of. That feedback didn't kill the idea, it refined it. The company didn't succeed in spite of launching rough, it succeeded because of it. Feedback offers something fantasy never can: real-world alignment. It pulls your work out of the echo chamber of your own mind. It reveals what actually resonates, not what you hope will. That reality check is uncomfortable, but necessary. Because the purpose of your work isn't to impress yourself. It's to serve, connect, and impact, and that can't happen without exposure. Still, most avoid feedback because it feels like judgment. But feedback isn't personal, it's directional. It's a compass, not a verdict. And often, the discomfort you feel when receiving it isn't the feedback, it's the ego interpreting it. Growth requires separating your identity from your output. You are not your project. You are the one refining it. To benefit from feedback, you need to invite it early and regularly. Build it into your process. Show the draft, ship the prototype. Ask the question, not when it's finished, but when it's forming. The goal isn't to be right, it's to be responsive. Feedback makes your work iterative, adaptive, alive. The longer you wait for feedback, the higher the cost of change. A small correction early is a pivot. A correction too late is a collapse. Don't be afraid of course correction. Be afraid of pouring your energy into something the world doesn't need, understand, or want, because you never asked. The best creators don't just tolerate feedback, they seek it. They know that every comment, critique, and insight is a breadcrumb towards something better. They don't defend their work. They develop it. They let it be shaped by those it's meant to serve, and in that humility they gain clarity, traction, and trust. Let go of the fantasy that you can get it perfect on your own. You can't. You're not supposed to. Start before you're sure. Share before it's polished. Ask before it's finalized. Feedback isn't the enemy of creativity, it's the partner of progress. Feedback reveals truth that fantasy conceals. Early exposure accelerates growth and relevance. Feedback is not judgment, it's direction. What project or idea are you holding back from sharing, and what might you learn if you exposed it sooner? Share a rough version of your work with one trusted person and ask for honest, specific feedback. Chapter 6: The Courage to Launch Half-Baked. A flame doesn't wait until it becomes a wildfire before offering light. It flickers first, small, uncertain, vulnerable. Yet in that flicker is power. Not because it's strong, but because it dares to be seen before it's ready. That's what it means to launch half-baked, to show your flame while it's still flickering. To offer the early version, the incomplete thought, the rough prototype. Not because you're careless, but because you're brave. Courage is not loud. It doesn't roar from a stage or declare its presence with fanfare. Courage is often quiet. It's the whisper that says, share it anyway. Even when it's not perfect. Especially when it's not. Launching half-baked is a confrontation with the part of you that wants to control perception. The part that says, only show the world what's guaranteed to impress. But that mindset traps your progress inside performance. It makes you a curator of polish instead of a creator of change. Every meaningful thing you admire, every product you use, book you love, service you trust, was once a rough draft. Someone had to take the leap before it felt safe. The first Kindle looked like a calculator. The first version of Facebook was just a directory. The first SpaceX rockets exploded. None of it was ready. But it was real, and real beats ready every time. The barrier is fear. Fear of looking foolish, fear of criticism, fear of exposure, but fear doesn't disappear with more time. It doesn't shrink with more planning. It dissolves in action. When you launch half-baked, you train yourself to walk through fear rather than wait for it to leave. And that's the real gift, not the launch itself, but the person you become in doing it. Psychologist Susan David calls this emotional agility, the ability to take values-based action even in the presence of discomfort. Courage, in this view, is not a feeling, it's a behavior. And it's built by reps. Every time you launch before you're sure, you develop a new kind of confidence, not the false kind built on applause, but the real kind built on resilience. This is why the most prolific creators often look reckless to the cautious. They ship frequently, they test openly, they pivot publicly. It's not because they don't care, it's because they care enough to move. And that movement is the difference between the invisible and the influential. You don't need to trust the outcome, you only need to trust the process. The process of trying, learning, adjusting, and trying again. Launching half-baked isn't the opposite of excellence, it's the path to it. Because what's half-baked today might be brilliant tomorrow, but only if it's allowed to leave the oven and meet the world. There's a difference between premature and proactive. Premature is thoughtless. Proactive is brave. You know the difference. Premature ignores preparation. Proactive respects progress. When you've done the work, when the idea exists in some form, when you've reached the edge of almost, that's the moment to leap. Not later. Not perfect. Now. And when you leap, something shifts. Not just in what you release, but in who you are. You become someone who doesn't need certainty to move. Someone who acts while others wait. Someone who trusts that the real courage isn't in having the answers, it's in asking the world to help you find them. The flicker becomes a flame. Not because it was flawless, but because it was visible. Courage is showing up before you're certain. Launching half-baked is the seed of excellence, not the enemy of it. Fear shrinks when faced, not when postponed. What idea or effort are you waiting to polish, and what might shift if you released it now? Identify one project you've been refining too long. Set a public release deadline within 72 hours. Chapter 7: Messy First Drafts, a Hidden Superpower. The first version of anything worth building is ugly, not kind of rough or almost there, truly, unapologetically messy. The kind of messy that makes you cringe when you reread it. But in that mess there's magic. Because messy means movement, and movement means you're creating something that didn't exist before. Most people never make it past the pristine idea stage. They love thinking, dreaming, visualizing, but translating that into a first draft, that's where resistance flares up. It doesn't feel like progress, it feels like imperfection exposed. The sentences don't flow. The plan is vague, the product doesn't look like the vision. But that's the point. First drafts aren't supposed to impress. They're supposed to exist. Every brilliant creation had a chaotic beginning. Your favorite book? Its first draft was filled with half-baked ideas and crossed-out paragraphs. That movie that moved you to tears? Its screenplay was rewritten dozens of times. That app you use daily? The beta version probably crashed every few minutes. The power wasn't in perfection. It was in the willingness to begin without it. Messy drafts are misunderstood. People see them as failure. In reality, they are the birthplace of refinement. They carry the raw material, the untamed potential, that later becomes brilliance. What makes them powerful isn't their clarity but their courage. They mark the moment you stopped being a thinker and became a builder. In psychology, this is known as creative emergence. It's the messy, generative phase of any project where ideas collide and reshape. It's where chaos becomes coherence. But coherence only comes after you let the chaos breathe. Skip the mess, and you skip the evolution. The real insights don't show up until the second or third round, but they only exist because something, however flawed, came first. That's the secret most people don't want to accept. The polished final version you admire was built on the back of something you'd likely be embarrassed to show. And that's okay. Because it's not the quality of the first draft that matters, it's the fact that it gives you something to shape, something to sharpen, something to point to and say, this is where it begins. Yet perfectionism tries to steal this power. It tells you to wait until the first version is cleaner, smarter, sharper, but waiting kills momentum, and momentum is the most precious force in the creative process. When you create a messy draft, you preserve the spark. You honor the urgency of the idea, even if the execution is clumsy. Clumsiness is not a character flaw. It's a creative phase. When a toddler takes its first steps, no one criticizes the wobble. The stumble is celebrated. Because the stumble proves the child is moving. Why should it be any different with your work? Why do you demand elegance from something that's just learning to walk? Messy drafts give you freedom. Freedom to explore without judgment. Freedom to discover without the pressure to dazzle. They release you from the tyranny of expectation and grant you access to the joy of becoming. Because that's what a first draft really is, a declaration that you're in motion, that you've stepped beyond the safety of concept and into the wild terrain of creation. So make it rough. Make it wrong. Let it contradict itself. Let it sprawl. Let it lack structure, beauty, or even sense, because all of that can be shaped, all of that can be smoothed. But none of it can happen if you never create it. The messy draft is not your weakness. It's your origin story. First drafts are valuable because they exist, not because they're polished. Progress begins the moment you choose creation over contemplation. Messy beginnings are the foundation of refined outcomes. What have you refused to start because the first version might be messy? Start a first draft today, with zero pressure to make it good, just make it real. Chapter 8: Breaking the Approval Addiction. A mirror only reflects what stands in front of it. But an addict to approval treats every mirror like a judge. Every glance, every opinion, every reaction becomes a verdict, and slowly, silently, they stop moving unless applause is guaranteed. Approval is seductive because it feels like affirmation. It mimics belonging. When others nod, like praise or agree, it gives a temporary high, the sense that you're on the right track. But approval is a borrowed compass. It points not to your truth, but to what pleases the crowd, and when the applause fades, so does your direction. This addiction begins innocently. You share something, and someone claps. You adjust your tone, and they smile. Over time, you learn to chase that reaction, not intentionally, but habitually. You second-guess the raw version of your work. You round the edges of your words. You hesitate before publishing, posting, presenting. Not because it's not ready, but because you're not sure it will be liked. That fear isn't weakness. It's human. We're social creatures wired for acceptance. But when acceptance becomes a requirement for action, progress dies. You become a performer instead of a producer. You sculpt your output around assumed expectations rather than necessary expression. And that's when the work loses its edge, its truth, its power. Some of the most groundbreaking ideas were hated before they were praised. Van Gogh sold only one painting while he was alive. Innovators, artists, writers, and leaders are often misunderstood, sometimes for years. If they had waited for consensus, we would have missed their genius. Because the work that matters rarely begins with mass approval, it begins with conviction. The approval addict waits to be chosen. The courageous creator chooses themselves. They understand that rejection is not always a signal of failure. Sometimes, it's a sign that the work is different, uncomfortable, ahead of its time. And difference is where disruption lives. In neuroscience, the brain's reward system lights up with social validation. But the same system is activated through internal wins, acts of self-trust, small completions, quiet courage. You can retrain your brain to crave momentum more than applause, to prefer the satisfaction of integrity over the sugar high of praise. But it requires awareness. It requires withdrawal. Breaking the addiction means you start acting without pre-approval. You share even when silence follows. You finish even when no one claps. You choose truth over trend. Not because you don't care, but because you've decided to care differently. You no longer need everyone to agree. You only need to stay aligned with what you're here to do. Approval is fleeting. Growth is lasting. The likes disappear. The comments fade, but what you build from authenticity remains. It evolves. It impacts. It finds its tribe, not through universal applause, but through unmistakable resonance with those it's meant to reach. There's a freedom on the other side of letting go, a freedom to risk, to create, to stumble without shame, to speak without scripting yourself for mass appeal. You get to trade popularity for purpose, noise for nuance, applause for alignment. And in that space, your work sharpens. It finds a voice that isn't watered down by fear. It finds courage that isn't fragile, because it's no longer built on validation, it's built on vision. The mirror doesn't get to decide anymore. You do. Chasing approval dilutes authenticity and delays action. Meaningful work often comes before mass validation. Self-trust creates freedom to create, finish, and share without fear. Where have you allowed fear of disapproval to mute or delay your creative voice? Share something today without waiting for feedback, likes, or validation. Let it stand on its own. Chapter 9: Systems for Swift Shipping. A bakery doesn't wait until the morning to decide how to bake bread. The process is set. The dough is prepped the night before. The ovens start on schedule. The rhythm is predictable, and because of that rhythm, the results are consistent. The magic isn't in the inspiration, it's in the system. Most creators and doers rely on energy. They wait for motivation, for clarity, for the right mood. But moods are fickle, and motivation is fragile. If you depend on them, you'll ship when it's convenient, not when it counts. The difference between those who occasionally finish and those who ship regularly is not talent. It's process. Systems are what turn good intentions into dependable output. Without a system, every decision becomes a debate. Should I start today? Should I revise that piece again? Should I wait until I have more time? Each question is an opportunity to delay. Systems remove the debate. They answer in advance. You don't ask if, it's just what you do. Shipping fast doesn't mean working frantically. It means working predictably. It means designing your workflow so that motion becomes default. Think of a musician who always writes a verse before noon, a startup team that ships a new feature every Friday, a writer who publishes an article every Monday, no matter what. These are not habits born from inspiration. They are the result of infrastructure. Systems create safety. Not the safety of perfection, but the safety of knowing you're always moving. They protect you from emotional turbulence, from overthinking, from burnout. When your output is tied to structure instead of feeling, you no longer depend on being in the right headspace. You just show up and execute. Consider the concept of a minimum viable routine, the smallest repeatable structure that guarantees momentum. Not a massive overhaul. Just enough consistency to eliminate resistance. Maybe it's 1 focused hour per day, or 3 Pomodoro sprints per week. The point isn't scale. It's sustainability. Systems don't need to be complex, they need to be repeatable. James Clear calls this the power of identity-based habits. When you build systems, you don't just change your schedule, you change how you see yourself. You become someone who ships. Not occasionally, reliably. Your system becomes a mirror that reflects your commitment. Of course, not every system will work forever. They're meant to evolve. What matters is that you start with one, a schedule, a framework, a container for your output. Without it, momentum will always be optional. And optional effort rarely survives pressure. When you have a system, you spend less energy starting and more energy finishing. You know what time to begin. You know the next step. You know how to measure progress. And that clarity unlocks creativity. Ironically, constraints don't limit freedom, they create it. When the boundaries are defined, your focus sharpens, and your work deepens. Your speed increases. Systems also reduce shame. Without a plan, every missed task feels like failure. But with a system, you understand the rhythm. If today slips, you reset tomorrow, because the plan is bigger than one day. It's a rhythm, not a rescue. It's not about streaks, it's about returning. To finish ugly faster, you need more than courage. You need containers. You need rituals that beat resistance, not to stifle spontaneity, but to support it, because when you know the structure will catch you, you're free to leap. The goal isn't to hustle harder, it's to ship smarter. Trying to bake your bread before the city wakes, not because you were inspired, but because your oven was already hot. Systems create consistency when motivation fails. Repeatable routines make progress automatic. Shipping fast is a product of structure, not speed. Where in your life are you relying on willpower instead of a reliable system? Design a simple system this week for one task you want to finish regularly. Keep it small, but sacred. Chapter 10. Redefining Success Mid-Flight. A rocket doesn't travel in a straight line. From launch to orbit, it makes thousands of micro-corrections. Left, right, up, down, tiny shifts invisible to the eye. If it waited for a perfect trajectory before takeoff, it would never leave the ground. The launch isn't the final shape. The course is shaped in motion. We're taught to define success before we begin, set the goal, map the steps, lock in the outcome. But this kind of rigid planning assumes you already know everything worth knowing. It assumes the map matters more than the terrain, and when the reality doesn't match the vision, disappointment sets in. The truth is, success needs to be redefined along the way. Not as a failure to aim high, but as a commitment to staying real. The problem with fixed definitions is that they age quickly. What felt like the right target last month may not fit who you've become this month. Goals are made with limited information. But growth gives you access to better information. And if you're not willing to pivot, You end up chasing a version of success that no longer fits your truth. This is not indecision, it's evolution. Flexibility isn't a lack of discipline. It's the presence of awareness. It means you're paying attention to what's working, what's resonating, what's actually needed. And in that awareness, you trade fantasy for feedback. You let reality shape your next move. The danger of rigid success is that it makes you blind to opportunities outside your plan, blind to improvements you didn't anticipate, blind to signals that your original vision was only a stepping stone, not a destination. If you cling to what was, you miss what could be. Think of a startup that sets out to solve one problem, only to discover their customers need something different. The companies that win aren't the ones who stick stubbornly to the first plan, they're the ones who listen, adapt, iterate. They succeed not because they had the perfect idea, but because they were willing to redefine success mid-flight. Reinvention is not a threat to your mission, it's proof you're in motion. Pilots call it correcting for drift. The wind shifts. The speed changes, the environment evolves. To reach the destination, you must adjust. And in many cases, you end up somewhere better than you imagined, because the map wasn't the masterpiece. The movement was. This doesn't mean giving up. It means letting go of what no longer serves. It means distinguishing between your goal and your ego. Are you clinging to the outcome because it's still right, or because it would be embarrassing to change it? Courage isn't just launching, it's revising. Mid-course, mid-build, mid-belief. Progress often looks like contradiction. What you once celebrated, you now release. What once felt certain, you now question. That's not inconsistency, it's intelligence. As the data comes in, you respond. As you get feedback, you refine. This is how real momentum is sustained. Not by committing to a fixed outcome, but by committing to constant relevance. When you redefine success, you give yourself permission to grow. You stop measuring your worth by outdated metrics. You stop forcing outcomes that don't fit anymore. And instead, you move forward with humility, curiosity, and courage. You trade the illusion of control for the power of responsiveness. The sky doesn't punish the rocket for course correcting. It rewards it with arrival. And so will you, if you're willing to adapt. Success must evolve as you gain new insight and experience. Flexibility in direction is not weakness, it's wisdom in motion. Redefining mid-flight ensures relevance, sustainability, and truth. Where are you clinging to an old definition of success that no longer fits who you're becoming? Revisit one goal you've been chasing. Ask, is this still the right target, or is it time to pivot? Chapter 11. Iterate like you mean it. A sculptor doesn't carve a masterpiece in one stroke. She chips, steps back, studies the angles, then chips again. Each pass reveals what wasn't visible before. She's not correcting mistakes, she's uncovering form. Iteration isn't fixing. It's revealing. Too many treat iteration as an afterthought, a backup plan in case things go wrong. But iteration is not the plan B of excellence, it's the engine of it. Nothing truly exceptional is born fully formed. It is shaped, refined, tested, and reshaped again and again. If you're serious about creating something meaningful, iteration must not just be allowed, it must be expected. The lie of perfection whispers that you should get it right the first time. But the first time isn't the test of your worth. It's the start of your process. Expecting brilliance on the first attempt is like planting a seed and being angry it's not a tree by morning. Growth takes cycles. So does creation. When you commit to iterating, you shift from outcome-obsessed to process-driven. You stop measuring success by immediate reaction and start measuring by refinement. Each draft, each version, each feedback loop becomes a lever of depth. You're no longer afraid of flaws, they become signals, not setbacks. The science backs this. Research in product development shows that rapid iteration leads to faster innovation. Companies that prototype early and test often don't just improve, they adapt in real time. They fail faster, yes, but they also succeed faster. Because every iteration is a shortcut through uncertainty. It tells you what to keep, what to cut, and what to change. But iteration isn't just tactical, it's emotional. It asks you to let go of attachment, to release your ego from the version you thought was final. That's the hardest part. Because once you've put something out there, you want it to be right, to be done. But done is a moving target. And the creator who wins is not the one who hits it once, it's the one who keeps chasing it, refining their aim each time. Iteration is also an act of humility. It says, I don't know everything yet, and that's okay. It invites input. It welcomes discomfort. It recognizes that brilliance often hides behind the third, fifth, or ninth attempt. The amateur sees revision as failure. The pro sees it as freedom. Still, most resist it. They want finality, closure, certainty. But what they miss is that iteration gives you more than improvement, it gives you resilience. You become less fragile, less reactive, more curious. You learn to see your work not as a reflection of your identity, but as a living process, something separate from you. Something that can be stretched, sharpened, evolved. And in that evolution, magic happens. Suddenly what felt vague becomes clear. What felt weak becomes strong. What felt scattered begins to sing, not because you forced it, but because you gave it time. You gave it attention. You gave it passes, like a sculptor circling the stone, and each pass got you closer to the truth. Iterate like you mean it. Not reluctantly, not apologetically, but as a ritual of excellence, as a demonstration of devotion to what you're building. Show your work the respect it deserves, not by worshipping your first attempt, but by believing it can become more. The greats don't fall in love with their first version, they fall in love with what their work could become. Iteration is not failure, it's the path to refinement and mastery. Great work emerges through cycles of feedback, revision, and courage. Every new version is a step closer to the truth your first draft hinted at. What project have you declared finished too early, and what might be possible if you return to it with fresh eyes? Revisit something you've published, presented, or launched, improve one element, and release it again. Take care, and be well.